Welcome to this Prophetic Sound podcast. I'm Pastor Shawn Baker. Today we're dealing with a very interesting subject. And what we're dealing with today is the subject of that God will often separate you before He elevates you. Or let me say it like this: before God elevates you, He will often separate you, right? And this is a place of vulnerability right here for most believers, because the tendency is to go back to what is known, to what's normal, to what's comfortable, and not understanding what is happening and where God has taken us, right? It's the fear of the unknown, right? And all of us deal with that. I've certainly dealt with it ministerially. I've dealt with it personally. And I know that many of you that have been in the way for some time can also identify with what I'm talking about. So really, what I want to do is I want to dive into this subject using three individuals in Scripture: the Apostle Paul, Joseph, and Moses. I want to use these three as exhibit A's, if you will, A, B, and C, as we examine this process that God, before He elevates, He often separates. So I want to show you something, and I want to deal with the vulnerability that comes with this separation before elevation, right? Because often the enemy, he's never fighting you on where you are. You've often heard me say, and many others say the same thing, he's fighting you on where you're going. And he's trying to prevent you from reaching your highest destiny. But in order for you to reach your highest destiny, God will have to take you off an exit ramp, and He's going to have to deal with you personally, right? To prepare your heart, to prepare your mind, to prepare your spirit for that high place, for that place of purpose. Okay? Nobody gets there. Nobody gets to that place of purpose without experiencing this season or moment of separation. Before I even get to the Apostle Paul, Joseph, or Moses, I'll use Abraham and Isaac as an example. You remember when God was ready to make a great nation of him and really begin to take this thing to another level. Isaac was already born, right? That was the promise fulfilled, but now the promise had to be multiplied. And before it could be multiplied, God isolated Abraham and Isaac, told Abraham, go up to the mountains of Moriah, offer your son to me as a sacrifice to the mountain that I'll show you. And then He separates Himself from the lads, and He tells the lads, you stay with the asses, me and my son, we're going yonder to worship, and we will be back, which tells me that he had faith to believe that God could raise him up again. Now that's just amazing. That's radical faith, right? But people of faith must learn to embrace that place of separation, because that place of separation is typically the prelude to divine elevation. It certainly was with Abraham and Isaac, and I would tell you it's going to be the case with you and I as well. But let's dive into this, and let's look at the Apostle Paul first. In Galatians chapter 1, Paul says, starting at verse 13, he says, "For you have heard of my conversation or my lifestyle in time past in the Jews' religion. Now that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God and wasted it, and profited in the Jews' religion above many of my equals in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by His grace, to reveal His Son in me, that I might preach Him among the heathen, immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood, neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were the apostles before me, but I went into Arabia and returned again unto Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and abode with him 15 days. But of the other apostles saw I none save James, the Lord's brother. Now the things which I write unto you, behold, before God, I lie not." So I'm focusing here on this 17th verse. He says, neither I went up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me, but I went into Arabia and returned unto Damascus. And then 18 says, here it is, then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and abode with him 15 days. So the Lord obviously had a high call on the Apostle Paul's life. And Paul embraced that call. But before he embraced that call, there had to be a season of separation before the call that he embraced was fully activated. And that season of separation lasted 3 years in the wilderness, 3 years of study, 3 years of prayer, three years of breaking away from what was in order to prepare for what would be. And what would be was this man went on to be used of the Lord to basically write 2/3 of the New Testament. I mean, it was amazing what came out of that season of separation, what came out of that season of isolation, if you will. And then when he comes out of this season of separation, he goes and he spends time with Peter for 15 days. Can you imagine the conversation that took place between Paul and Peter? I would love to have been a fly on the wall to listen to the conversation that took place over 15 days. Those nights were probably late, and those mornings were probably early, and those days were probably filled with amazing conversation. And then he goes up and he meets with the Lord's brother, in verse 19, James. And I can only imagine the conversation that took place there as well, right? And we see that the Apostle Paul, he didn't just run into his new season. No, he embraced that season of separation. And what happens, I think, with many new believers is they have a hard time embracing that season of separation. See, the revelation that Paul had of who Jesus wasn't going to fit with his old circle. And God had to isolate and separate him before he could elevate and use him. You understand? And I want to say to maybe some of you that are watching that maybe, or listening, maybe you're in that season where you feel like that you are being separated and that God, and maybe you even feel isolated. And that's a place of vulnerability. You understand? I'm sure the Apostle Paul in that wilderness for 3 years was probably being tempted of the enemy to think things like this. What have I done? I'm an idiot. I've walked away from a life of security, a life of luxury, a life of comfort, a life of blessing. You understand? But he had to die to those things. And it's in that season of separation that once that crucifixion of those things happen, right? You take up your cross in that season, there's going to be an elevation. That's the resurrection of the purpose of God coming forth in and through your life. And so the Apostle Paul went through it. But then there's another guy that went through it as well. And his name is Joseph. Joseph had a great dream. And Joseph was looking to his brothers and his father and mother to help facilitate the fulfillment of that dream. Oh, they were going to. It just wasn't going to be in a way that he wanted it to play out or he thought it was going to play out. So he tells the dream to his family. His brothers hated him the more, the Bible says. They despised him. And you know the story. They dropped him in a pit. They were going to leave him for dead. Judah and Reuben steps in and says, you know what, here comes a band of Ishmaelites. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. So they sold him into the slave market. They went down to Egypt. The Ishmaelites, they flip him, and they made some money on him. And Potiphar bought him. And then Potiphar's wife came on to him. And Joseph resisted the temptation. And God bless his soul. What an example. He resisted the temptation. And then he was falsely accused, and he was in prison. And after being in prison, he was forgotten about by the baker and the butler. But he was there. He went in at the age of 17 years young into that prison. Think about that. And he spent 13 years separated from his family, separated, from a normal life. 13 years in isolation. But that separation is ultimately what led to elevation. And, I just have to believe that anybody or anything that God's going to use in a magnificent way is going to go through seasons of separation, seasons of isolation. Not that you are intentionally isolating yourself and becoming your own martyr. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you recognize that you no longer fit in the old crowd. You no longer fit in the old structure. You no longer fit in the old model. It's no longer working, right? And that's when you discern that God is beginning to separate. And there's nothing wrong with you going into the secret place and allowing God to cultivate and to prepare you for that elevation. Now, for Joseph, he placed him in there and he hid him away, right? Paul, he went into the wilderness to seek out what he was supposed to do, right? And to seek out understanding. He had to separate it, to come apart before he came apart. He had to separate himself. Well, what about Moses? Moses is a little different story. Moses ends up murdering the Egyptian that was whooping up on his Hebrew brother, and he was found out. And as he was found out, he realized, oh my, I've killed an Egyptian. I'm at Pharaoh's house. My life's not going to be good. And so he goes on the run, and he separates himself from Pharaoh's household and from the land of Egypt as a whole. He escapes, not of choice, but of necessity in order to survive. And he was running from his own mistake. He was running from his own sin. And this reminds me of Romans 8:28, that all things work together for the good, right? To them that are called according to his purpose. And so Moses was ultimately called according to the purpose of God. And even his running, his separation, this isolation from Egypt is ultimately what led him to a place where God would visit him in that place of isolation, in that place where he'd separated himself. And he stayed there at Jethro's house, his father-in-law's house in Midian, for 40 years. Think about this. For 40 years, he was separated. And I believe that during that 40 years of separation, no doubt he was probably contemplating the things that his mother told him as she was raising him. He was probably rehearsing some of the things that she had instilled in him, knowing that he was a Hebrew, knowing that that God drew him out. That's what his name means, to be drawn out, that God drew him out, knowing that there was more to his life than being a vagabond that was on the run and in hiding. There was more purpose for him. See, that's where some of you are right now. See, some of you right now are in that same spot. You know that there's more. Maybe you feel that deep call of God upon your life, but yet you're in this season of separation. I believe that God's getting ready to bring a visitation to you, just like he did Moses. Remember, Moses was on the backside of the wilderness, of the desert, minding his own business, and all of a sudden, God shows up. And the Bible says that this ordinary bush just combusts into an extraordinary heavenly flame. And a voice came out of it and said, Moses, Moses, draw not nigh hither, for the place where thou standest is holy ground. Take the shoes from off your feet, Moses. You're not going to run. Your days of running are over. Your days of isolation are over. You've been here for 40 years, and now I'm sending you back to that place that you ran from, and you're going to conquer it. I'm going to help you conquer it. And see, he was elevated above his own mistake. Man, that's a word right there. He was elevated above his own mistake. See, his separation is what ultimately led to his elevation. And he goes back into the very place that he failed, that he tried to take matters into his own hands, and he did it God's way. I've learned that in seasons of consecration that we're calling separation, that when we come out of those seasons, we're not going to do it our way. We're going to do it God's way. And the things of our past where we have failed now become a platform for the victor for the overcomer, for the conqueror. And that place didn't have dominion over him. His past didn't have dominion over him. His past failure didn't have dominion over him. God gave him dominion over all of it. And so great things come out of separation. Don't ever forget, before God elevates you, he's often going to separate you. And he's separating you and setting you apart for his purpose, right? For a consecrated purpose, to prepare you for the things that he has for you. And so I want to encourage you that there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. You may just be in a process where God is purging things, purging old habits, maybe even purging old friends, and you feel like, man, is it worth it? Oh, I'm telling you, it's so worth it, because God is going to rightly position you. He's going to elevate you, and you're getting ready to go to new heights. Maybe some of you say, well, you know what? I feel like I'm on the run. I'm ashamed, and I've not been around my family for the things that I've done for years. I've not talked to them, not been around them. You're like Moses. You're on the run. You're separated. But you know what turned his mourning into dancing ultimately? You know what exchanged that spirit of heaviness for that garment of praise in Moses' life? It wasn't that God made it all go away. It's that God showed up and manifested himself to Moses in that place of isolation, in that place of separation. And Moses realized the God that I serve is bigger than my past. And so that's what ultimately led to his elevation, is that when he realized the God that he served was bigger than his past. The God that he encountered was bigger than his past. So no matter why you're in that place of isolation or separation, it may be the Lord's doing, it may be your own doing, irregardless, hear me, irregardless, when you encounter the God of the secret place, you're going to come out of it and you're going to go further than you've ever have gone in your past, and you're going to have power and dominion over your past. And here's the deal. The Lord is going to use you in ways that you've never been used before, and you're going to see him do things that you've never seen him do before. I have realized that sometimes that God, in my personal life and in my personal ministry, I have realized sometimes, this is important, I want you to hear this, that there have been times that the foundation that I was sitting on wasn't big enough in order for God to do what he wanted to do in me and through me. And so God took me through a season. God took me through a journey. God took me through a process that I look back and I would say, man, I felt isolated during that process. When I come to realize, looking back, all he was doing was putting me on a little bit larger foundation to accommodate what he wanted to do in and through my life. And so I have learned personally and ministerially not to kick against those seasons, but rather to embrace them, because I know they're leading to something bigger and better. I hope this conversation has been a great source of encouragement to you. I always enjoy having it, and I just pray that it spurs you on in a more intimate way in your walk with the Lord. May the Lord bless you, keep you, and cause his face to shine upon you.